So much like Gone with the Wind, as well as its movie adaptation, Live and Let Die the book, as well as its movie adaptation, are all rather controversial for the very same reason. I felt like this was something important that needed to be addressed before jumping into this review. So just like with Casino Royale, the book already picks up in an already ongoing adventure. I kind of wonder if maybe this is where the filmmakers got the inspiration for the pre-title sequence that adorns all the Bond movies. Bond has just landed in New York City, and thanks to the CIA, is quickly through customs and is on his way to the rendezvous point. While he is in a taxi, his passport is checked in, and he is given a small envelope of $1,000. Now, at first, Bond is a little hesitant to this, as it feels like he's kind of taking advantage of them a fair bit. However, the agent taking him to the hotel says that M has already approved of this money, and this is to be used for whatever you deem necessary for the mission at hand. So after his arm gets twisted, Bond takes the money. At the hotel, he sees a rather unique sight. He sees a rather interesting chauffeur, but even more interesting than the chauffeur is the person in the back seat. Just a giant hulk of a man who has a very dreary complexion about him, to which Bond puts in the back of his mind that this could very well be the Mr. Big that he was assigned to look into. At the hotel, Bond meets up with Felix Leiter. After how well the partnership worked out in the previous caper, the CIA as well as the British Secret Service figured, why not put them together again? At the hotel is where they fill each other in as to what they know about this case. So we start off with a famous briefing session from M, and after the events of the last book, he wants to know how that skin graft took place. He takes a look at the hand and he's like, it's a little lopsided. The hair is probably not going to grow in properly. But hey, at least you're not marked by Smirsh anymore. M starts the briefing with flipping a small coin onto the desk. Bond inspects it, to which he doesn't really know what the significance of this coin is. So the case with this particular coin, it came from a pawn shop in New York City, from a rather unassuming man. No prior convictions, lives in a modest neighborhood. So how in the world did he get in contact with this coin? A coin that is from the 16th century. The general story going around is that the coin came from Blackbeard's hoard. However, such a thing wouldn't make any sense, as the origin of the coin wouldn't match up with that history. But it does match up with the history of Bloody Morgan. So the trail of this coin is followed from person to person to person, until it finally comes to a mysterious figure simply known as Mr. Big. It is believed that he is slowly filtering these coins through the market in an effort to raise money for Smirsh. And on top of that, he had very much had Smirsh connections. So Mr. Big comes from Haiti, but due to his fluency in French, was quite a valuable asset for the Allies during World War II. However, after the war ended, he disappeared for quite some time into Russia, where he was slowly trained in the ways of Smirsh. And from there, a lot of people might see him as just another American gangster. But how he keeps his power is not so much through respect, like Don Vito of The Godfather, but through fear. Through the voodoo practices, he has convinced his followers that he is the reincarnation of Baron Samedi. I've heard some people refer to this figure as Baron Samedi, but the movie refers to him as legendary Baron Samedi, folks. That's Samedi for those of you who speak French. So I'm going to be saying Samedi for this review. Now I guess now would be as good a time of any as to just kind of give a rundown as to who this Baron Samedi, or Samedi if you prefer, is. I do not claim to be an expert in Haitian voodoo religion, but I do know this much. So, Baron Samedi is a Loa, which, simply put, is a servant of one god called Bondi. Baron Samedi has a lot of roles in the voodoo religion, but in terms of both the movie and the book, they really just kind of state he is the Loa of death. But yet, it's not so much that he brings death to people, but rather, after you die, he's the one that guides you through the path of the underworld to the afterlife. And obviously, there are a lot more beliefs to the voodoo religion than that, but this I at least wanted to make perfectly clear because the book, as well as the general conception of voodoo, is the idea that it's more about dark magic and witchcraft. However, that falls more under the you-do category. I could probably go more into detail about this, but I don't want this whole video to be about the voodoo faith, and, well, I'm not really sure if I'm really the best person to be explaining the beliefs of the voodoo faith, but that's basically all you need to know for this book, as well as the movie adaptation. So with all this, Bond and Felix are brought up to speed. And from there, it's all about the process of assimilating Bond into American culture, trying to pick up on the slang, the wardrobe, the common food, as well as other things to make it seem like he's not obviously from England. The next day, he wakes up and he's waiting for breakfast. When he's reading an anthropological study about the voodoo faith, and it's pretty much filled with a lot of the misconceptions that have been going around, the idea that people that practice the voodoo faith can, call spirits from the dead, can mind control people, human sacrifices, animal sacrifices, all this other dark stuff. Now, as Bond is reading all these horrors, there is a knock at the door, which shocks Bond because he was talking about how, tribal drums incite a sacrifice about to happen. He comes to his senses when he realizes that there's just a small package at the door. Bond picks it up to realize that it's ticking. Bond is rightfully a little freaked out about this and decides to put it off to the side just to be absolutely sure. And it's a good thing he did, because no sooner did he do that, it let out an earth-shattering explosion that shook some of the pictures off the wall. Bond is not harmed, but he is very much shocked by this. So he calls up Felix, who in turn calls a police investigator to see what in the world this bomb was made out of. And looking through the ruins of it, they see this little note. It's from Mr. Big, and it says, "Your days are numbered. How big the number is how much you meddle in my affairs." This stock warning, Bond sees Mr. Big a little less as another American gangster and starts to see him more as a finger in the giant hand of Smersh. Felix and Bond then go down to the police station to try to see what kind of record they have on this mysterious Mr. Big. The only things that they've been able to gather is that he owns a ship called the, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, the Secretar, that often stops in Jamaica to then drop its shipment off to a worm and bait shop. I have no idea how in the world you're supposed to pronounce this, so I'm just going to write it every time I mean to say it. Nothing really suspicious about it. He catches exotic fish from Jamaica and then lands them in St. Petersburg, Florida. They are then tasked to trying to make it to this worm and bait shop. However, before doing so, Bond wants to try to get a closer look into this network that Mr. Big has set up through his religion of fear. And Felix is going to join him along as well. The police captain in charge of this hesitantly agrees to it, but gives Bond a very fair warning. Because Mr. Big doesn't have a criminal record and they don't really have a warrant for his arrest, they say the policy is live and let live. However, Bond is still very much ticked off as to how they betrayed the innocent Vesper from the last novel, that his policy is live and let die. The police captain is obviously a little shook up by this, but says, just try not to do anything stupid, okay? So Bond and Felix head down to Harlem. This is the epicenter of Mr. Big's operation. And after the bomb from this morning, Felix takes it very seriously, and ordinarily how he used to have blonde hair, he dyes it black to try to hide his true identity. And it's a good thing he did, because Mr. Big's network knows that Felix and Bond are on their way. And so there is a mysterious dispatcher known as Whisper. In his particular city where he grew up in, the tuberculosis epidemic was everywhere. And as such, he only has one lung, and the most he can get out sounds about this much. So he sends out the order to look out for these two. Not to harm them, but to look out for these two. So, the way the book describes it, Harlem is quite a scary place and is not very accepting of outsiders. In fact, no cab will ever drive there during the nighttime. Instead, they have to take the bus, and that is where they are spotted. The pair head to one of Mr. Big's barbecue joints, known as the Seventh Heaven. There the pair take in a rather, shall we say, saucy dance routine, when just as the performer is about to remove her last bit of clothing, the light goes out and the table both of them are at descends right into the floor. From there, the pair are held at gunpoint by some of Mr. Big's men. Felix is separated because they're not really sure who exactly he is with his disguise. However, the description matches Bond perfectly, and they take him to see Mr. Big. What's interesting to note is the henchman that actually takes Bond to Mr. Big is named Tee-hee. And the main reason they call him this is because he has a very high-pitched laugh, so it's like tee, something like that. Bond is sat down in a big leather chair facing Mr. Big at the other end. Bond is then bound to a leather chair by Tee-hee, where Mr. Big wants to ask a few questions as to who his character is, as well as why they are interested in Mr. Big's activities. Now what's interesting is, instead of having instruments of torture, Mr. Big has a mysterious woman known as Solitaire. She has clairvoyance, which is far better than any lie detector that he has ever seen on the market. She takes a regular deck of playing cards, and thus is able to see if there is any truth to what Mr. Bond is saying. However, Solitaire takes quite a liking to Mr. Bond, to which Mr. Big sees this and immediately takes a big whip from behind him and then hits Solitaire, basically saying, "Forget yourself, woman, you belong to me." However, Bond knows that she is going to be a bit of an ally. So, he comes up with a story that Felix, instead of working for the CIA, is in charge of the U.S. Mint, and they're looking into these rare coins because they want to know if this is going to devaluate of the dollar. Solitaire pulls out the cards as usual and tells Mr. Big that this is the truth. Mr. Big knows that Solitaire is not reliable, but without probable cause, and because it would just be a whole mess of paperwork, he can't just kill Bond and Felix. So he just lets them off with a warning. Felix is ordered to be roughed up quite a fair bit and then left just outside of the hospital, while Bond has his pinky on his left hand broken. From there, Bond is taken to the garage to be dropped off at his hotel as if nothing happened. However, along the way, Bond is actually able to kill Tee-hee and then take care of two more of Mr. Big's guards before driving away in the car that would have been assigned for him at that time. At the hotel, completely beaten and his pinky just throbbing with pain, there is a call at the front desk. It's from Felix, who says to call him right away. In doing so, Bond gets his side of the story. So the interesting thing is, because of Felix's love of jazz music, he is able to talk to a lot of these guards, and as they see him as a rather alright person, they have to keep up appearances, so they rough him up a little bit and then drop him off at the hospital. And then Felix paid off a doctor to say that he was in urgent care, he was recovering from so many other things, and it all just went fine from there. However, after this encounter, both of them decide to make their way to St. Petersburg. Now, this is easier said than done because Solitaire actually gets the number of Bond's hotel room and says that she wants to get away from Mr. Big as soon as humanly possible. Bond then starts to weigh the pros and cons of this and realizes that this has to be a sincere escape rather than a spy that is meant to sneak in to his investigation. There is already an escape plan in place for both Bond and Felix. Felix is going to fly down to St. Petersburg, while Bond is going to take the train. He calls the superior that's in charge of booking the tickets and tells them that his wife will be on board. So Solitaire is able to make it on board the train just fine, and Bond slowly meets up with her in their cabin. Now, it's going to be a few days' travel, and there the pair start to talk with each other and figure out what exactly their story is. Now, they go into how Solitaire got her powers of clairvoyance. So just like Mr. Big, she grew up in Haiti, and because of her, I guess, mother, caretaker, they're very vague on if she even had parents in the first place, but she was given a magic potion when she was very young, and this is what gave her her powers to be able to read the tarot cards, as well as just see little bits and pieces of the future. Now, for the most part, the train ride goes alright, and Bond even makes good friends with the attendant of their cabin. And the main thing he says is that you need to be careful, and the only thing he's really able to give him is 2 door wedges to make it so nobody could come in to their cabin. What he wanted to say, but he couldn't for fear of not only Baron Samedi getting to him, but having a hit put out on him, is that Mr. Big saw Solitaire right before she got on the train. And as such, Mr. Big has one of his men on board the train masquerading as one of the waiting staff. So one night, they receive somebody trying to break in to their door. Bond easily spooks him away. However, not before seeing a very threatening message on the door. Basically, it's a quote-unquote voodoo incantation saying, "Please do not haunt us," which the Baron has summoned that you must die, or something like that. And then there is also a little picture of a diamond, which I guess is also part of the incantation. In seeing this, Bond decides he takes off in another spot to Florida, and then slowly makes his way down to St. Petersburg to meet up with Felix. There, Bond then decides to go to a diner to have some breakfast with Solitaire. And, wow, Ian really didn't have high regards to say about the whole diner industry, did he? He really rips in what an establishment could be. And I guess with him being in the United Kingdom, it'd make a little more sense, but, well, I just find it interesting that I have bumped into people outside of the country, and they want the diner experience because the coffee is legendary. Well, that's one of the things he specifically says is awful compared to how Europe is. Yeah, but maybe it's like a kitsch or novelty thing. But anyway, Bond makes it down to the rendezvous point. A cabana that is just outside of St. Petersburg. Felix opens the door, and he just seems like he's one of the zombies that Baron Samedi created. He opens the door, but he doesn't really see them. He's just kind of looking around, and then all of a sudden it just hits him. He realizes that Bond and Solitaire are before him. It turned out he spent most of the morning doing a whole lot of cleanup work, as shortly after Bond got off the train, not only was that car Tommy gunned down, but then a whole bunch of grenades were thrown in there, and there was no body found, except for the body of the very helpful attendant. Together again, Bond and Felix decide to investigate this worm and bait tackle shop. Now Solitaire is a little on edge about it, and she says that she can sense that there is something very off about that. Bond does take this a little bit into consideration. He's not really a true believer of her clairvoyance, but can sense that perhaps there is an issue. So she orders that her room to be locked and that she not let anybody in. They go to the worm and bait shop, where there's not really a whole lot to it except for one guy just kind of sitting there cleaning up his Henry rifle. He is completely drenched from head to toe in sweat. Felix decides to ask him a few questions, pretending that he has a ship that he wants to try to dock right near the worm and tackle shop, to which the guy's like, "No, you can't do that. No such ship exists. Now please, get off my property, you're trespassing." And then to show his force, he puts the gun together and then shoots down a flying away pelican. They take the hint and they decide to try to come back later. When they return to the hotel, it seems that there was something to Solitaire's clairvoyance, as she is nowhere to be seen. However, the hostess says that loud music is not allowed, to which the pair are like, "What about loud music?" Apparently, some movers came in with a big stereo system, and they had a hard time getting the huge box out the door. With this, the pair know that Solitaire had been taken captive. Bond then investigates what happened within Solitaire's room. And it turns out that Solitaire definitely has some instincts, because her getaway money that she stuffed away for this particular purpose, she was able to hide underneath the bed before any of the guards could take it. And with it, Bond swears that with that $5,000, he is going to do everything in his power to get Solitaire back. That night, Bond and Felix have a very hard time sleeping when Bond wakes up at about 8 o'clock in the morning. He wakes up to find that Felix had already gone down to the worm and tackle shop. Bond, thinking that the worst might have happened, decides to head down there himself. But just as he's about to head out the door, the phone rings. It is the hospital, saying that Felix was involved in a car accident. It's nothing serious, but the patient wanted to see Bond right away. So Bond heads out to the hospital and inquires about not only the patient, but the doctor that did the phone call. And according to the hospital, neither of them exist. He heads back to find this bundle of bandages now in Felix's bed. And on it is a simple note that says he disagreed with something that ate him. At first, Bond has a hard time believing that this mess of bandages is actually Felix, but in undoing it a little bit, he sees that little crop of straw hair and then immediately calls for the police surgeon. The prognosis is not really all that good. It's really about 50-50 whether he'll live or die. However, it is very much agreed that something had been trying to eat him. And because of his damages, he will probably never have use of one of his arms and one of his legs ever again. And that's assuming that he can actually make it through the night. Bond then goes on the warpath. He checks out of the cabana, but not before getting a dinner, as well as some supplies to break into the worm and tackle shop. He's able to do so when, on a hunch, he wonders about the poisoned fish section. He takes a look at a section of scorpion fish, which I honestly had to look this up, and yeah, scorpion fish are very much a thing, and they're pretty similar to lionfish from what I can tell. Very deadly, but only really if you touch them. They don't really bite or anything. So Bond is able to fish out one of the scorpion fish and realizes that there is a thick layer of mud beneath the fish. He stirs it away to realize that there is a whole bunch of valuable coins hidden at the very bottom of the tank. Upon making this discovery, the lights go on, and the single proprietor, known as Robber, then immediately starts opening fire on Bond. Bond tries his best to defend himself. However, he only came with about 2 clips, while the robber knew that this guy would be coming back and came with plenty of ammunition. So, Bond feigns the idea of having a broken ankle and starts to pretend that he is taken captive. He then notices a trap door towards the front entrance, and Bond finally puts it together. Underneath is where the shark tanks are, and that is where Felix was put in. So, with one last heave, Bond disarms Robber and then throws him over the pit. As he's holding on for dear life, he is willing to tell Bond anything. To which Bond finds out that Mr. Big, as well as Solitaire, are in Jamaica, and even describes a little bit about what happened to Felix. At first, Bond starts to feel a little sympathy for him, until he remembers that Robber threw Felix into the shark tank, and then only fished him out after being viciously destroyed. So, Bond just simply kicks him down into the shark tank, where he is slowly eaten alive. From there, he heads to Jamaica. So in Jamaica, Bond gets the story from Strangways, the head of Jamaican intelligence. There were definitely rumors that the treasure of Bloody Morgan was indeed found on a little area known as Surprise Island. It was a local fisherman that found it, and then a big conglomerate bought up the island, a conglomerate owned by Mr. Big. And ever since then, anybody that's attempted to go near the island has had bits and pieces of them wash up on a neighboring shore the next day. Mr. Big also uses his fear of the voodoo religion down there, as every night there are ceremonial drums that keep playing. Strangways figures, let's send one of our best agents to investigate the island. But before doing so, he is introduced to a character named Quarrel, a Cayman Islander who is just as much at home on the Cayman Islands as well as he is in the water. Strangways gives him a private residence to be able to begin the training. Now from there, Bond starts to get a little more used to being underwater as much as Quarrel is, and as such, notices the abundance of the wildlife and what to avoid. And the main thing that happened was during one of their training exercises, a rogue barracuda attempted to attack the pair. Bond was able to stun it, while Quarrel was able to kill it. Afterwards, Quarrel just saves the head, opens up the jaw, and then shows Bond how deadly these things are. There are just rows upon rows of teeth, and even the tongue itself had some teeth on it. They are very aggressive, and they are also very deadly. In fact, the harpoon that Bond shot into the barracuda had very thick stripes in them from where the barracuda was eating it. The night comes, and Mr. Big's ship ports one more time on Surprise Island. Now, this is something that wasn't too out of the ordinary, but Mr. Big seems to be moving out. Bond decides that tonight will be the night to try to take over the island. Thankfully, during the training exercises, Bond was able to get some major equipment, including a large knife, harpoon guns, frog suit, scuba gear, and a limpet mine. Now, I'm not really sure how in the world that's different from regular mines, but how it's described is it's not only magnetic so it can stick to the bottom of the boat, but also it's a chemical reaction that sets off the explosive. So Bond takes his underwater trudge slowly to Surprise Island. In doing so, he is able to get the mine in place on the Sequitur, alright. However, it is at that point that the drums start the roundabout. And then Bond notices that the people that are playing the drums are also chumming the waters. With this smell of blood, the sharks, as well as the barracuda nearby, are just going insane. One of them takes quite a big gash to Bond's left shoulder, and he can slowly start feeling the water seep into his scuba gear. He keeps swimming like crazy when he notices that there is a rock that is slid away as if it was just a door. Inside, he finds a cave. Now, thankfully for Bond, the sharks as well as the barracuda do not pursue. However, Mr. Big's men pick him up. Inside, there is a massive cave, as well as the fantastic hoard of Bloody Morgan's treasure. Everybody stops for a moment, however the drums keep going and going. Mr. Big then orders that the amplifier be turned off, to which it is, and the deafening of the drums stops, and the work resumes. Bond is then taken upstairs to a chamber that used to be a prison hold. There, Solitaire is laid out on one of the tables. Bond tries his best to get to Solitaire. However, not only is Mr. Big's henchman a little too quick for that, but even Mr. Big pulls out a small little gun. Just try that again. Bond, seeing that there's no choice, is bound up to the wall right next to Solitaire, where Mr. Big goes over what his plan is going to be. Bond is quite thankful, as the fuse that he set to the mine is for 7 hours, and the more time he can stall, the less likely that he will be on board the ship, and the more likely Mr. Big will blow up with the ship. So he's going to take all the money that he can to St. Petersburg and slowly funnel all his funds back over to Smersh. Now, the other thing that's part of that plan is how he is going to dispose of Bond and Solitaire. What he's going to do is a variation of keel hauling. Now, the best way to describe what keel hauling is so the keel is the bottom of a ship. So imagine that this is the ship right here. Essentially, you would tie a rope from one end of the ship, say here, and then tie the other person here, and then you pull on the rope so the guy goes under the water, scrapes along the sharp bottom, and then makes it back to the top again. This time, though, he is just going to tie the pair behind the ship, where they will slowly be scraped away from the coral. With that much blood in the water, the sharks and the barracuda will take care of them until there is nothing left. He then bids them a short but sweet good night. The next day, the treasure is filled up and the pair are tied. During that time, Bond managed to tell Solitaire about the plan. In fact, his cover was almost blown as Solitaire started freaking out, saying that she saw death everywhere. However, Bond was able to hide this under the idea that, women can be hysterical sometimes. But anyway, the pair are tied and they're slowly being dragged along. They both switch places every so often so they can get an idea as to where they are in the ocean. The boat goes forward and they stop very closely to the wall of coral that would have chewed them up. However, instead of destroying them, it actually saved their lives because it helped save them from the massive shockwave that the mine was able to produce. After that, there's just a lot of scraps, dead fish, and there is the lone figure of Mr. Big trying his best to make it to the coral. Now, I'm surprised I haven't mentioned this sooner, but the main reason he was able to sell this image of him being Baron Samedi is because he had a very weak heart, which as such gave him a very ghastly looking complexion, almost like a reanimated corpse. So he's trying his best to be able to make it to that wall of coral when all of a sudden his heart gives out. And instead of Bond and Solitaire being eaten by the sharks and the barracuda, it is Mr. Big that is eaten. Or at least mostly, the way it's described is everything but his head is eaten, which just kind of stares mockingly at Bond, saying, "You have not beaten me yet, Mr. Bond." But then the shark comes back, and then there is nothing left of Mr. Big. From there, it's really just a whole lot of cleanup. The rumors of Bloody Morgan's treasure being found has kind of brought in a resurgence to try to find it again. However, the idea of all the sharks and the barracuda being nearby, a lot of people are pretty hesitant, but salvage divers are going in to try to get this great loot. With another job well done, M gives Bond 2 weeks of passionate leave. To which Strangways and Bond look at the letter and say, well, he must be compassionate rather than passionate, right? But I think this was M's way of basically saying, yeah, solitaire is hot, you know. Why don't you have fun with each other? And that is where the book ends. Now, when it comes to comparing the book to the movie, there are quite a lot of differences here. So where do I begin? Well, instead of Mr. Big's base of operation being in Jamaica, it's in a made-up island named San Monique. And Mr. Big also has an alter ego named Dr. Kananga. Which, here's a bit of a fun fact for you. So the crocodile farm in the movie was owned by a Mr. Ross Kananga. And as a way to honor him, head writer Tom Mankiewicz decided to name the villain after him. And in fact, he makes a brief cameo in the movie as he's the stunt double that ran across live alligators. So the call to the mission in the movie is, instead of investigating a Mr. Big for his mysterious rare coin operation, Bond is ordered to check in on 3 mysterious murders that took place. One of them in Harlem, in New Orleans, and the other in San Monique. So Bond decides to investigate the New York City one first. So they got that part right. After doing a little bit of searching, he finds his way in Harlem, where, just like in the book, we get to see the full extent of Mr. Big's network. And instead of the Seventh Heaven barbecue, we go into the Filet of Soul. Bond tries to get some information on this Mr. Big when the booth turns around, and there he meets Solitaire for the first time. However, he's still held at gunpoint, just like the book describes it. Now, unlike the book, where Mr. Big did not want to have to deal with the paperwork of getting rid of the agents, the Mr. Big of the movie doesn't really care, and he immediately orders the execution of James Bond. But not before Bond plants in the idea that perhaps Solitaire and him will be lovers, which is sort of in the book. After dispatching of his 2 guards, he then meets up with Struthers. In good hands, Bond decides to further investigate at San Monique itself. There is an attempt on his life when a poisonous snake attempts to drop in for a quick bite, when Bond makes a tactical flamethrower and roasts the snake. However, danger isn't over yet as there's a mysterious knock at the door. Bond disarms the would-be assailant to realize that she is actually an associate of Felix sent to help on this investigation. Rosie gives the location as to where Kananga's hideaway is, when Bond employs the service of Quarrel Jr. Now, this is an important thing to keep in mind, is that in the movie Dr. No, which was the first Bond movie, they killed off the character of Quarrel. So, in order to try to retcon this, they had it be Quarrel's son instead. Which, honestly, I think that's a pretty good way to do it. Rosie is revealed to be a double agent, and is then killed by the trap that was laid for Bond. Bond comes back later that night, where he, for lack of a better term, gets it on with Solitaire. Now, when it came to the book, Solitaire got her clairvoyance because of a magic potion that she drank. Well, here in the movie, the origin isn't necessarily described, but they say that after she has sex with somebody, she loses her clairvoyant powers. However, this isn't a complete waste, as Solitaire at a few times noticed that there were great riches in the hills on the estate. And there, the pair discovers that Kananga is growing a whole bunch of heroin. With this knowledge, it is a race back to try to tell their superiors what is going on. However, once they land in New Orleans, Mr. Big's men captures them again. Bond is able to escape, but Solitaire is once again back into the possession of Mr. Big. It is here that Felix and Bond decide to check out on the fillet of soul that is in New Orleans to try to see what exactly is going on. Struthers went on ahead, but it is quickly bumped off. They figure he is inside. Bond is taken captive after a rather interesting show. There, Bond has to confront Mr. Big as to what he did with Solitaire. However, he ends up ripping off his disguise to show that Mr. Big and Kananga are both the same person. Now, it's interesting to note that, unlike the book, Mr. Big and Baron Samedi are not the same character in the movie. In fact, Baron Samedi is actually just a henchman of Mr. Big / Kananga. And it's kind of interesting that because of Jeffrey's performance, he had such a life within the Bond universe. In fact, you can play him in a lot of video games, which is kind of weird now that I'm thinking about it. That'd be like playing as Archangel Michael in one of the Bond video games. Either that or maybe Charon from Greek mythology. But I'm getting lost in theology again. Back to the movie. So there is this suspenseful scene to see if Solitaire still has her power or not. To which, just like the book, both say that the lie is actually a truth, and Bond is let go. However, instead of his pinky being broken off, Bond is brought to a crocodile farm where he is to be eaten alive. However, with some quick thinking, he is able to escape, destroy the heroin processing plant right next to it, and make his getaway in probably the greatest boat chase ever put on film. After the chase, Bond meets up with Felix once more, to which the CIA, as well as him, gave a good going over as to what was going on at the Fillet of Soul. And the only things that were left were 3 tarot cards, which all point to the idea that Solitaire is to be sacrificed. Back to San Monique, where Quarrel sets a whole bunch of detonating charge onto the heroin plants, and Bond is to go after there to rescue Solitaire. Seems like it's going to be easy enough when Baron Samedi comes out from the grave. However, Bond is able to quickly dispatch of him right away. Bond then follows where Baron Samedi came from, underneath the grave, to find a vast cave network, and this is how Kananga was getting his heroin out to the rest of the world. Now, the important thing to mention here is instead of using old treasure to raise funds for Smersh, the movie goes for something interesting. So, essentially what Kananga / Mr. Big plan is that he's going to start giving away a whole bunch of heroin for free. This will take all his competitors out of business until he is the only one left. And then he can charge whatever he wants for him. In the underground hideaway, there is quite a big scuffle between Bond and Kananga. Now, it's interesting to note that the final confrontation does end up with both of them being in a shark tank, but instead of Mr. Big being eaten by sharks, Bond force feeds a compressed air pellet in the Kananga, which then causes him to explode. Even with something silly like that, this is still a very highly regarded movie and is still very fun all the same. And then there is just one last thing to deal with. So, in the book, the character of Tee-Hee is killed off pretty quickly, but in the movie, Tee-Hee actually manages to last until pretty much the end of the movie. So, Bond and Solitaire are taking the train back to New York City, and along the way plan to just get to know each other a little more. However, Tee-Hee sneaks aboard the train, and there is one last battle with Bond. After disarming Tee-Hee, we then see that Baron Samedi didn't actually die, but he is still very much alive and well. I'm going to guess this was just kind of a nod and a wink to the camera as opposed to saying, hey, the voodoo faith actually does exist in this movie. But still, though, it is a bit of a disappointment he didn't show up again in The Man with the Golden Gun. So the only other things to mention is, well, I know there's a lot of big fans out there of License to Kill, and you probably immediately picked up on the whole he disagreed with something that ate him reference. And also, I can't believe that it's coincidence that the same actor that played Felix in this movie was then brought back in this movie, somehow getting a little bit of a connection, which was then kind of foretold within the book itself. It's a very unique sandwich, wouldn't you say? Then, as for the epic climax of the book, this was actually later reused in For Your Eyes Only. Which, if you were to ask me what I think is the worst Bond movie, this would be it. Yeah, I could just kind of hear the people tapping away already. What can I say? After the big fun adventures we had before For Your Eyes Only, it just feels like a lot of the spectacle and a lot of the fun was just kind of trimmed out. I hope you'll join me next time for Moonraker. I can tell you right now that the Moonraker reviews, as well as the Diamonds Are Forever review, I'm gonna get up actually pretty quickly, as I've already written down a review for both of these books already. It's all just about finding time to be able to record it and edit it. But I hope you will join me next time for Moonraker, which, yeah, I'd have to say this one is my personal favorite.